We are going to be talking today about conflict. So I want you to think about how you feel about conflict. Are you one of those people that likes to avoid it at all costs? You do not want to engage in anything where anybody disagrees? Or are you somebody that kind of likes ruffling people's feathers every once in a while? Maybe you instigate a little bit of conflict. Or maybe you find yourself somewhere in the middle. You guys are all looking at each other. I like it. You're engaging. No pointing fingers. You're going to start some conflict. So on a scale, you don't have to share this. You don't have to say it with your neighbor. You don't have to say it out loud. But on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you find yourself? 1 being, if conflict is happening, you are out. You are not going to engage. You're not going to be a part of it. You're going to leave. 10 being, if you see a deer in the road, you are going to speed up so you can hit it head on. So you probably have an idea where you fall somewhere, in the middle, maybe one end or the other. So I want to tell you, when I was kind of unpacking my feelings about this, I realized that I had this preconceived notion when I was younger, that if I was a good Christian, if I was kind and I was loving and I was nice, then I wouldn't ever have conflict. And that if I wasn't that, or if I did engage in conflict, then that meant I wasn't doing something right. Maybe I wasn't loving well enough, I wasn't trying hard enough. I realized I was kind of holding on to this expectation for myself. And I think sometimes as a church, we do that as a whole. We do not want to disagree. We want to all be this happy family that gets along all the time. And so sometimes we see people that do disagree, and instead of engaging in a healthy conversation, they tend to just walk away. And maybe we never see them again. They just remove themselves from any form of conflict. Maybe it's emotionally, maybe it's intellectually, but rather than work through it, they walk away. Now, the other side of it, the reverse side of it, that I think we see a lot in our society is this feeling that we deserve happiness, that you have a right to your way, that you can say whatever you want, even if it hurts somebody's feelings. You have the right to express your feelings at the expense of anyone. Maybe you've experienced some degree of this. Maybe you've seen it on social media. Maybe you know somebody that feels this way. So as we think about that, as we think about conflict in our world, I want to take a look at Exodus. We're looking at Exodus 7, and as you recall, if you're familiar with this scripture, Moses is leading people out of slavery. He's got a couple million people that are following him. They are in the deserts. They have been hungry, and they were complaining, and they were frustrated, and God provided food. They had manna and quail. But they're still frustrated. They're in a desert. There's not much water. There's a group of people that are starting to grumble and complain and starting to think that maybe their life of slavery was better. Maybe it wasn't so bad for 400 years when they had to go through all this hard stuff and they were slaves, because at least they had food, right? So a lot of times I like to refer to this as the Back to Egypt Committee. There's the Back to Egypt Committee that says, hey, we need to go back. Even though we had to throw our firstborn babies in the water and we had to sacrifice all of our freedoms, at least we had food. It wasn't so bad. The good old days were great. Let's go back. So Moses is dealing with that. Moses knows he's meant to be calling these people out of Egypt, and he is traveling through this, but he is also frustrated. So let's go ahead and take a look at our scripture that we have in Exodus 7, 1 through 7. It's water from the rock. At the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of Sin. This is just the name of the place. It's just the name. It doesn't mean anything more than that. They left the wilderness of Sin and moved from place to place. Eventually, they camped in Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So once more, the people complained against Moses. Give us water to drink, they demanded. Quiet, Moses replied. Why are you complaining against me? Why are you testing the Lord?" But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What should I do with these people? They are ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Walk out in front of the people, take your staff, the one you used when you struck the water of the Nile, and call some of the elders of Israel to join you. I will stand before you on the rock of Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink." So Moses struck the rock as he was told, and water gushed out as the elders looked on. Moses named this place Massah, which means test, and Meribah, which means arguing, because the people of Israel argued with Moses and tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord here with us or not?" So sometimes in Scripture, we need to take a look at the context, we need to explore the translation, we need to try to figure out what's going on. And sometimes in Scripture, exactly what it says is exactly what is happening. That is one of those times. This one here. Moses is frustrated, people are complaining. I explored a bunch of different commentaries, they all said the same thing. But I do think something that's important to note from this is one of the commentaries that I came across said, when they grumble about something minor like a lack of onions, which we see in Numbers, God responds with anger. In those cases, they're ignoring the miraculous rescue out of slavery. Foolishly, they're wishing they're back in their house of bondage. But when people need something to survive, their complaints have a different quality, and God always provides. When water was undrinkable, God made it sweet, in Exodus 15. When they have no food, God rains down bread from heaven, Exodus 16. So it's important to note that while these people are grumbling, while Moses is frustrated, God hears them, and God provides. This also sounds to me, I don't know if any of you have children that would at night say, "Can I have one more snack? One more drink of water? I just have to go to the bathroom one more time. One more story?" I hear this with Moses too, right? We just had water. We need water now. We have food. He says, please, trust God, right? Do you have people in your life that you can relate to this feeling? No matter what happens, they always have something to complain about, right? This is what Moses is dealing with. Every day there's something new. Maybe we feel like we live in a society like that, right? Every morning, even if it's sunny, somebody's going to complain about the sun shining. Too many days of sun in a row, right? So here's something I was thinking about. I talked before a little bit about my feelings about conflict. In John 15, Jesus says, "I'm the true vine." He says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit. He prunes the branches that do bear fruit so that they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you." Jesus is saying in the Gospel of John, sometimes there is pruning that needs to take place. Sometimes there are emotions you need to let go of. Sometimes there are habits that you are holding on to that aren't true. Sometimes there's maybe relationships in your life that are harmful. I experienced a pruning experience with my feelings about conflict. Now, many of you know, when I first started in ministry here at Trinity, it was about 12 years ago, and I was the Upward Sports Director. Now, let me tell you, if you do not like conflict, sports ministry is not the best place to be. So when I first started, let me just say, nobody agreed. I had referees that were mad. I had coaches that were mad. I had leadership teams that were mad. I had parents that were mad. Every game day, somebody was mad. And I would bring back all these rules to my leadership team, and here was the reality of it. I couldn't make everybody happy. Some people wanted us to be this league that was producing high school athletes and college scholarships, and other people wanted us to be this league where everybody got along and everybody got a chance to play. And then these referees were stuck in the middle, and these parents were upset. And I'll tell you what, it ended up in physical fights on occasion. But I realized I couldn't make everybody happy. And I had to live with that and figure out what I was going to do. And I worked with a pastor and mentor of mine, and I came to this realization that was really impactful for me, that Jesus was a peace seeker, not a peace keeper. There's a difference there. Now, peace is not the absence of conflict, but it is an ongoing action and choice to engage in appropriate and respectful and challenging but important conversations. Let me tell you that again. Peace is a choice. It is active choice to respond in important conversations with respect and authenticity. Jesus gives us this example on many occasions throughout the Bible. The Bible tells us a lot about conflict. And so for me, realizing that Jesus was an active peace seeker, that he sought out conversations so that he could achieve peace, was really powerful. Jesus does not call us to be peacekeepers. He calls us to be peace seekers. Sometimes we can have two things that feel like they're opposing ideas and have them both be true. We can hold two different ideas in contrast that are both true. And that happens when we see Jesus' response in the temple. When we look at Matthew 21, I love the Message version of this. Jesus walks into the temple, the church, and he realizes that it has been transformed, that it is no longer being used as a house of worship. And this is the Message version, so it's very blunt, but this is scripture from Matthew 21. It says, Jesus went straight into the temple and he threw out everybody that had set up shop, buying and selling. He kicked over tables of loan sharks and the stalls of dove merchants. He quoted this text, "My house is designated as a house of prayer. You have made it a hangout for thieves." Now there was room for the blind and the crippled to get in. They came to Jesus and he healed them. Can you picture that? Jesus walking into a church and kicking over tables. And yet we know Jesus never sinned. Jesus was completely blameless and without sin. But he experienced this righteous anger of what was going on in his Father's house. And he made space for those who needed healing. He made space for the outsiders and the outcasts who needed to be in the place of worship. So we know Jesus never sinned, but we also know Jesus knew that wild, healthy emotion of anger. He expressed this anger to those who turned his Father's house into a place for bargaining and gambling and selling items. No, I still don't love conflict, but I do love people who aren't afraid to tell me kindly that they disagree with me or that maybe I'm wrong. I also love people who are humble and willing to admit that maybe they messed up and they want to grow from it. Do you have people in your life like that? Now let me tell you something. We are the church. We are the place that works through all of these things. And I just think if we could get this right, how would that change the world? If we could be people that engaged in conflict, that was active peace seekers, that had these healthy, wild emotions, but they worked through it in love, if we could do that here, and then we could take that into the world, and people knew we were Christians by the way we engaged in healthy conflict. We didn't always agree on everything, but we showed love when we didn't. Can you imagine what that would look like? Could you imagine what that would look like on social media? If that comment section was just flooded with righteous anger and kindness and love and compassion, people would notice, don't you think? Now, John Wesley, the founder of the United Methodist movement, he also knew that conflict was inevitable. And so he created these guidelines for Christian conferencing, and he identified it to be a means of grace, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But this is something that sometimes when we go into charge conferences or important meetings as a district, as a state, as whatever it may be, as a conference, this is something that a lot of times you'll see posted. There's a big bulletin that we have of it, and I want to spend a few minutes talking about it, because this is what we identify as United Methodists to be guidelines for healthy conflict. First, we start by respecting others as Jesus would have done so when he was here on earth. Jesus walked with disciples that were fishermen and sinners and tax collectors, and he showed respect here on earth. Pray for others as well as yourself, especially with whom you disagree. Do you have anybody in your life you disagree with? We're encouraged to pray for them. Listen to others before thinking about what you want to say in response. Anybody here familiar with Stephen Covey? He has a rule similar to that. Understand what others are saying so clearly that you could articulate that state and state their view. Share your point of view with grace and humility, as well as honesty and candor. Focus your comments on issues discussed and not persons expressing them. Can you imagine what social media would look like if we did that? On issues and not people. Commit yourself to the unity of the Spirit, seeking consensus whenever possible. Give the time you need to work through the process in which you're engaged. We are not a society that values patience. What if we were to give the time that we needed to for all of those healthy disagreements? Acknowledge that you may be wrong even when you think you're right. And then finally, allow the fruit of the Spirit to permeate your way of interacting with others. Our fruit of our Spirit, we know some of these so well. We know we're called to love and joy and patience and peace and kindness and generosity. Those are all easy, maybe even faithfulness. But what about gentleness? Can we be gentle in spirit? Self-control, who needs that, right? What if we were to exercise it? And so, as United Methodists, as Christians in the world, not only are these guidelines for Christian conferencing meant to be a way to work through conflict, but as a means of grace, they are how God works at us invisibly as we become disciples. They are ways and means that we grow in holiness. Have you ever thought of conflict that way? As a way for you to grow in holiness in your spirit, as God moves and transforms you? As people of God, United Methodists are called to participate in Christian conference. We are called to. One of John Wesley's means of grace, Wesley taught that Christian conference is a practice that helps people experience grace. Are people experiencing grace through the way that you hold conflict and disagreement? Have you thought about the arguments in your life as being holy conferencing? Wesley expected Christian conference to shape people's lives. Is conflict changing your life? And then remember, we are called to move on towards perfection. That's our journey. We call it sanctification. It's one of our final stages of grace. And that's a journey that's always going. We never achieve it. But as we move on, God is changing our heart every day. So the conflict that you couldn't face yesterday, you are more equipped tomorrow to face. And that's the promise and joy that we have. That's the spiritual formation that's taking place in our lives.